Right, there we go. What's up, y'all? I'm Dr. Alauna, and we're here for another episode of Minding Your Amygdala Podcast. We're talking about the brain, the body, and behavior. And I could not let today go by without doing a message to America. I couldn't let the day go by. It's the 4th of July. It's Independence Day. And this is an Independence Day to remember. Y'all, I had to think a little bit before I talked about the presidential debate because I take my responsibility as a psychiatrist, as a healthcare provider, as a mental health practitioner. I take the responsibility to be careful with the things that we say and diagnosis and words that we throw around. So I have not publicly talked about the presidential election until now. I'm going to do that today. And in fact, I'm going to continue to do that for the next few weeks. I'm going to, in my July show of Demystifying Mental Health, I'm going to start by breaking down the brain and how we need to understand our president's leadership, the people who are going to be making decisions for us, and give us language for appreciating what happens to an older person's brain, because both President Biden and former President Trump are old men. So we need to talk about it, y'all. This is Minding Your Amygdala. I am Dr. Lana. Like I said, if you find this information helpful, please make sure that you, number one, support this channel by click that like button, and subscribe to Dr. Lana and get notifications when these episodes drop. And y'all, I stopped trying to be particular about it. I will think something. Yeah, listen, you just have to be in my brain to understand. So what I decided to do was change the format of Minding Your Amygdala and go in a more spontaneous way, but also making sure that I'm giving my viewers and the people who take the time to connect with me, giving you the language and the information of mental health, because it's going to save us. For real, y'all. Like, I'm scared. Okay, let's talk about. Can we talk about it? Is he scared? I'm scared. Okay. Let me tell you why. I'm actually not, because I have very solid beliefs and evidence for those beliefs, and I'm going to share with you how I think about this presidential race and think about the debate. So first of all, I'm trying not to cuss, y'all. WTH was that. I'm Hey, Danielle. Hey, y'all. Hey, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time that you come to this podcast, because it will be on the different podcasting platforms, whether it's Facebook, YouTube. I thank you for showing up and participating in this discussion, because y'all, like that debate literally made me sick to my stomach. And I really have been thinking about what to say about the brain across the lifespan, and why it is essential for us to understand our brains in order to save ourselves from imminent catastrophe. It's no longer hypothetical. And sometimes when people have been being extreme for so long, some of the meaning gets lost in the repetition of the words. But we are at a critical moment, not just for America, but for humanity, that we are facing multiple crises that need clear, direct, intelligent, informed leadership. And the presidency, the role of a president, is not just about one person. It's about that one person and also the team of people that they put around them, and the quality of them knowing that they don't know everything. One person cannot possibly know everything. You know what else series I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks is talking more about personality disorders, in particular, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and other conditions that antisocial personality and conditions that make someone irresponsible in their decision making. So let me back up a little bit because I want to first comment about what we know about Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has been around for a long time. One of the pros and cons of, we have a tendency to not like older people, but I respect what accumulative knowledge that comes with being in a position for a long time. Okay, that's the first thing. I don't know why we got to making old like her emails. A person can be old and still have a functional brain, a good brain, in fact. My grandmother is 92 and she'll tell you some stuff about some stuff. Okay, listen. So it is not necessarily that it's a problem that a person is old, but we need to think about their psychological function and think about their physical function. Joe Biden is slowing down. Okay. And there are conditions that cause people to slow down. We can see it in the stiffness of his body and his arms and his hands. And there are some conditions that cause people's body to move slower and have less balance. Those conditions, for example, Parkinson's can be one of them, but also understand that in Parkinson's, you can have an element that is a person slowing down, but that does not always mean that their brain will decline in function. Now, there is a type of dementia in Parkinson's where that does happen with their brain. So I do think that it's fair for us to be able to have answers about the cognitive status of people who desire to be leaders. I personally would love to see them actually do objective testing. So when I cringe every time I hear Trump say that he's done cognitive testing, because the MOCA test that he's described, the Montreal cognitive exam, I believe, that he describes, is a very cursory screening tool that we clinicians use to help identify when somebody needs further evaluation. But it is not a cognitive test. It's not an IQ test. And there's a few other tools that we use and questionnaires that you can administer in an office space that take a few minutes and that give you a sense of how a person is doing cognitively, but they identify different domains of learning and understanding. So I want y'all to see something real quick. This is the kind of stuff I read. This this is about dementia. I know you don't necessarily feel like reading this stuff, but this is comprehensive textbook of psychiatry. Does this look fun to read? It's actually very interesting. It's very interesting. But what I'm going to do is not torture you with you having to read this. I'm going to do some translating in the next few weeks. Let me talk into the microphone. I want to do some translating for you in the next few weeks about dementia and cognitive function and how we can really start to think about and evaluate, because this doesn't just apply to our presidential candidates. This applies to family members. This applies to us as we get older. This 40-something-year-old brain is not the same brain. Your brain fully matures at around 25, and then your peak function starts to go downhill. We put all kinds of food and other things in our body that's not great for us. We live stressful lives. We do all of these things that put wear and tear on this brain. So there is a expected normal cognitive aging element that we need to talk about and think about, because many people have this, right? We know the times where you're like, what's that? You calling the grandbabies by the wrong name? I'm like, oh Lord, my poor children. I just start naming stuff. Somebody answer me. I already do that. But it happens more often where you might mix up names. It may happen more often where you might lose track of the particular times or the dates. But that's not necessarily the same thing as being in a situation where you're presented data. As a president, right? Decisions have to come from being presented data and evaluating that data, listening to experts who have spent their life educating themselves about things that you didn't have time to do, maybe because you were doing other things. Okay, so this is how I'm looking at President Biden's performance. And y'all, The man stutters. He's had a stutter. Had a stutter. We know that he had a stutter. And he's never been a great orator. We got spoiled on Obama. Come on, let's keep it real. We love somebody who can command the audience and stir people. And that's not really Joe Biden. But Joe Biden has been steady and constantly focused on bringing attention to the very pressing problems facing America. Where I've experienced power outages, a tornado. My child is in the eye of a hurricane. Listen, I want climate change addressed. President Trump is literally still denying climate change. So we're going to talk about the type of brain condition that President Trump has, and getting and I really try to be as educational as possible, because of course at this point people can be mad. I know people are like, oh, you're not supposed to diagnose somebody you haven't seen. Listen, that whatever rules that are out there, those rules do not trump America, democracy, the country that has led the world in democracy cannot fall because people are not willing to speak out. So I'm speaking out. I hope that you also will speak out and allow us to steady the ship so that we can get this to the finish line. So listen, check this out. President Biden said the accurate words, but they came out raspy. He probably overtrained and overprepared. And he's an older guy, and his voice didn't hold up. You could hear him coughing. You could hear his throat was bothered. He needs some lozenges. I don't know. Okay. I was struggling. I was trying to give him one through the I was trying to give him one through the screen, like, bro, what's going on? Right. And did he get lost in his thoughts? Absolutely. Now, let me say, as a person who is potting and speaking and training and had to make presentations and news reels and things for a living, public speaking is the number one fear in this country. Being on the stage, standing in front of people, putting yourself out there and talking sets off amygdalas all over, okay, including mine. Even doing things like this challenges me to get past my blockades and the things that I don't particularly like and care for. However, when you go in front of that camera and the light comes on, your brain has to do a lot of work just to be up there, just to make coherent answers, to stay on task, to stay on target, to know what you want to say. And that's a complex thing for anybody to do, whether we're talking about President Biden or whether we're talking about former President Trump. So when we're looking at how two people have to listen, process, and respond, the rules of that situation put Biden at a disadvantage to start with, because he's a stutterer. It was like the bully pulpit, right? Like Trump being the bully that he's very good at being, and he can get in the pulpit and talk. He practices this on a regular basis. He can say whatever, and he was allowed to say whatever. I found it very strange that the moderators did not fact check or say anything. And so that puts Biden in a position where he has to not only respond to what lies, just blatant, like, I'm like, wait a minute. You could Google tell you who did what. He literally took responsibility for things that we know he didn't do. I literally know Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and what she has done. And so some of the things that he and Biden and Democrats and things. And so when you can just lie and no one will fact check you, now Biden has to respond to the lie and has to say what his point was going to be. It was a setup for failure. And that's what it was. It was a abject failure. However, does that make him incapable of making decisions for the country that look past red and blue? It's a psychosis, by the way, to look at the world and only see the parts of it that you think are important. Listen to the way that people are talking these days, and how divided they are and how extreme in their thoughts they are. Because if something fits my narrative, if it fits my party, there's no such thing as red states and blue states. Even in red states, there are people who vote blue. Even in blue states, there are people who vote red. And when a hurricane or a tornado or a storm goes through, it's all the United States of America. And so being able to empathize with people outside of your own belief system is an important, and by empathy meaning take the experience on that you can't have, the experience you've never had, can't possibly have in this lifetime, but be able to see another person's experience, and then the leader have to make decisions with all those people in mind. That is what is the hallmark of a leader and a good president. And so do I see concern? I see concern because this is America thinks that we have to uh really play this political game. It should have never even been a debate. Like Trump shouldn't even be allowed to run because he pulled a coup. Like January 6th, for him to say it was so peaceful. Yeah, there might have been a few peaceful people there, but we all saw them wrecking stuff. Like, and so the fact that we now have this coordinated movement of people who realize they cannot win by playing fair, so they are cheating. That is what we're going to be talking about, and why it is so dangerous for us not to understand mental illness. Because not only, uh, when I hear the way that former President Trump operates, I have to really think back to in 2015, 2016, when the presidential election was going. I started researching his background and kind of getting some information on him and really thinking about him in a way of like, how did he grow up? Who were his parents? How did they raise him? What was his situation? And if you are really curious, there's a good book from Mary Trump, his niece, I believe, who described very well his upbringing and used historical data to kind of let us in on even the fact that his mother struggled mightily with her mental health all his life and really didn't have the energy and the wherewithal to manage young Donald and his behaviors. And then we know that both of his parents had dementia in their older life. And both of them passed. When they passed, they had dementia, I think of different kinds. But again, as we talk about, and I lay out in these future episodes, the different types of dementia that are present. Because most of the time when people think about dementia, or a condition that causes someone to lose functions that they once had, they tend to think about Alzheimer's. We tend to think about people getting forgetful, repeating themselves and not remembering conversations that they had, forgetting the names of loved ones, sort of detaching from who their loved ones have known them to be. And don't get me wrong, these are very distressing conditions, and I will cover some of that in the future weeks as we go and try to help people understand the difference. But I want to focus in on the difference between uh, Alzheimer's that many people think of when we think of, Alzheimer's. We call it, no matter what you call it, you know what I'm talking about. Most people think of that. However, there are types of dementia that affect different parts of the brain, and based on those presentations will be what the person's behavior is showing. So, for example, the condition frontal temporal dementia, this, when I talk about this prefrontal cortex right here behind your forehead, tap it, wake it up, ding. Okay, that's what we need. We need this to come online. There is a dementia that causes the brain to deteriorate in the front and on the sides. And interestingly, I don't know if you've ever thought about the function of the frontal lobe, but if you want to look something up, look up Phineas Gage. And Phineas Gage was basically a dude that worked on the railroads back in the day. And I may get little details of the story, but wrong. But go with me. Phineas was a very studious, quiet, biblical, scholarly man. He was not he was a thoughtful person. People who knew him said they got along with him pretty well. And he railroad spikes, and one of them backfired somehow and went through his brain and took out his frontal lobe. And he survived. He was the first person that we saw with that kind of injury that completely like knocked out his frontal lobe but he was able to survive that head injury somehow, even though this was back in the days where, we didn't have the type of medicine that we have these days, thank God. Now, Phineas, uh, Phineas Gage ended up being a completely different person after that injury. He was the roughest, toughest, cussingest, boot scooting dude in town, and he was getting in fights, and he was doing all kinds of impulsive behaviors, and they began to recognize the impact of losing your frontal lobe. Your frontal lobe is your CEO. It's your best decision maker. It's the corporate head of the body that says how we're going to move. We're taking all these factors into account, and then we have short-term goals and long-term goals, and how do we get the body there? That's what your CEO, your prefrontal cortex, your wise mind, your God mind, your best brain, that's what it does for you. When you have frontotemporal dementia, matter of fact, let me see if this will let me share. And y'all bear with me because, okay. This is an overview of frontotemporal dementia. It's an umbrella term for a group of brain diseases that mainly affect the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. It's associated with personality, behavior, and language changes. In frontotemporal dementia, the parts of the lobe shrink, they atrophy, and symptoms depend on what part of the brain is affected. Some have changes. People with FTD have changes in their personality. They become socially inappropriate and may be impulsive or emotionally indifferent. Others lose the ability to properly use language. So this gives you some details a little bit. I won't read all that to you, but I want to highlight some of the specific and more common behavioral changes in frontotemporal dementia. And I'm not even going to wink. I'm going to be real direct and say, have you noticed any of these behaviors coming out of one Donald John Trump? The most common symptoms of frontotemporal dementia involve extreme changes in behavior and personality. Now, here's the thing. He was doing these things before we got here. He was doing these things before he got in office, but because we don't have good cognitive awareness of mental health conditions, a lot of us missed it. But increasingly inappropriate social behaviors, loss of empathy and other interpersonal skills, not being sensitive to other people's feelings, lack of judgment, loss of inhibition, compulsive behaviors, declining in personal hygiene. Okay, so these are just some of the things. Speech and language habits can be increasing trouble using and understanding written and spoken words. People with FTD might not be able to find the right word to use in a speech. Trouble naming things. People with FTD may replace a specific word with a more general word, such as using it for a pen. No longer knowing word meanings. Did y'all know that the U.S., us, this is USA? Okay, have a hesitant speech that may sound telegraphic by using simple two-word sentences, making mistakes in sentence building. Movement conditions. People can have tremor, rigidity, muscle spasms, poor coordination, falling, trouble walking, inappropriate laughter or crying. Causes, we're still working that out. But here's what I want to reinforce in this conversation. Because I know folks are not going, it's a lot of people out here that would like to vote for former President Trump. And I really try not to judge people. I really try to empathize and see what they're seeing and understand what's drawing them to him. And I think that a lot of that is that there's a lot of fears, and his primitive responses are good at tapping into fear, tapping into dopamine and our addiction systems. And so we see so many people who now have, y'all know I love talking about the brain. So those mirror neurons mirroring these behaviors, because these silos and echo chambers that we've created, the technology is holding us in this space. So what do we need to do? We have to pop the bubble. So I hope that you continue to join me in this Minding Your Amygdala journey. I'm going to close this episode out by really pointing out that I can't possibly explain enough for you to fully understand all of the intricacies of these conditions. However, what I do know is that it really does boil down to some very simple things, is that even though there are a lot of people who don't want to accept reality, a shared objective reality, there are ways for us to get to more detail. So for example, there is official, like there's machines that we can put these wannabe presidents in and scan their brain and have teams of professionals look at them and assess them and see what's going on inside of there. There are tests, intricate tests that people have long, scholars have thought about and made available, neurocognitive testing that can be administered. And it's not something that you do in an office visit that's run by your homies, Dr. Ronnie Johnson Jackson, who he don't even know. Those are not real cognitive exams. Those are not what we should base it on what he's telling us. We already have seen that he's going to say whatever is necessary for people to believe him. So there are labs that can be ordered. Okay, there's reversible causes of dementia. When you have red spots on the hand, that makes me want a syphilis test. He already said that it was his personal Vietnam. Listen, if you know, you know. So there are real reasons and real things that we can investigate and evaluate. Thyroid conditions, uh, reversible lab work. You know, the man don't be out in the sun. Even vitamin D deficiencies can cause people to develop what looks like dementias. I think it's more than that. But my point is, we haven't come anywhere near to doing any of the investigative, rational steps that we could take to have answers for this country about what's going on with the brains of those who want to lead us. Yeah, it feels wild that I even have to say that, but I I don't know. Maybe it's just me. If this rocks with you, hit the like button, share this with your friends, let them know to follow along so that we can learn more about dementias, about personality disorders, and about what makes empathy a core factor that you should consider when choosing your presidents. I hope this episode of Minding Your Amygdala spoke to you. I didn't want to go too long or too far without recognizing that on this Freedom Day, and I'm putting freedom in quotes because we still have some freeing to do. Most importantly, we might have written legislation that freed us from slavery, but America is still having a mental health crisis that is associated with our unaddressed trauma. We've done a lot to each other. We're in the midst of a societal traumatic stress syndrome, and it has a solution. Evolve. That's I know that seems like it's too easy, it's too hard. It's both, but it's the answer. So stay tuned for the next episode of Minding Your Amygdala Podcast. I am Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist, and it's time to evolve.